Good evening, everyone. Okay. Thank all of you for coming to our second CAM Talk of the semester. What an amazing turnout. This is really exciting. So, like I said, this is the second CAM Talk of the semester. We've got two more. The next one is next week. So keep your eyes open for flyers regarding that talk. Each year, we try to get at least one of our CAM talks given by a speaker that is somehow really associated with our actuarial science program. We have a really strong and large actuarial science program, so we feel that's really important. And today we have Stuart Klugman from the Society of Actuaries with us. Stuart Klugman, who is a PhD, an FSA, and a CERA, so presumably you all know what a PhD is, and I found out about half an hour ago that he is a fellow of the Society of Actuaries and a chartered enterprise risk analyst. And he currently works as a senior staff fellow in the education department of the Society of Actuaries, where he has been since 2009. And before that, from 1974 to 2009, Stuart was an actuarial science professor at the University of Iowa and at Drake University. He has co-authored the text Loss Models, which is used on Actuarial Exam C, and is an editor of two other of the actuarial exams. He has served 2 terms on the Society of Actuaries Board of Governors and is a 2-time recipient of the Society of Actuaries Presidential Award. And today he's going to talk to us about whether or not, hopefully he'll answer the question, is actuarial science a science? So if everybody could please welcome Stuart Klugman.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here. Believe it or not, I grew up in the Twin Cities. My parents lived their whole lives in Minneapolis and the suburbs, went to high school in St. Louis Park, did graduate work at the University of Minnesota, and this morning was the first time I set foot on this campus, which I don't quite understand why, but I'm delighted to be here, and I get to spend a couple more days here on Monday and Tuesday doing some other Society of Actuaries work on the campus. So we are going to answer a question today, and I should point out something else. We give our candidates for fellowship in the SOA some instruction on giving good presentations. So I'm going to give you a quiz at the end about something about my presentation. That's a piece of advice that I've learned from what we teach our candidates. We also teach them to be fully prepared with the environment you're in and to always have it so that your presentation is on the screen here, so that you don't have to keep looking back there to see what's going on. And of course, I've discovered it's not on the screen here. So the other piece of advice we give is to never make excuses about your speech in advance, which I've just done. Okay, can you see that? Anyone know who those 2 folks are? They are Muppets. Do you know which ones? What? I think I heard it. One's Beaker, and the other's his boss, Bunsen Honeydew. So there they are. What are they? What do they do? Oh, they're a particular kind of scientist. Beaker, he mixes things up, and they usually explode in some way. They're chemists. What did they study in school? Chemistry. Okay, so you're kind of getting the hang of it. Here's another person you might know. Who's that guy? So yeah, that's Albert Einstein. What is he? He is a physicist. And what did he study? Physics. Okay, got one more. Any idea who that fellow is? Oh, I got a plant right in the front. So that's Charles Darwin, and he's what? He's a biologist, and he studied biology. So what's the point of all of this? They're all scientists. Would anyone do? Well, we were not sure about the Muppet guys, but the other 2 folks would clearly be recognized as scientists. But yet, Bunsen and Beaker are not chemical scientists. Albert Einstein's not a physical scientist. And yet, we also see there are various disciplines that have science in their name. Political science, social science, environmental science, exercise science, and actuarial science. And so that's always led me to wonder about that, and I have formed a hypothesis. And my hypothesis that we're going to put to the test this evening is it true that any discipline that has science in its name probably isn't? That is, they've put it in to pretend that they're scientists. Real scientists don't have to tell the world what they do as science. Chemists don't have to tell you they're scientists. We just know. Yet we actuaries seem to have to tell people that our discipline is actuarial science to make sure you all know that what we do is science. So what I'd like to do with you this evening is explore an actuarial problem to help you all see what it is actuaries do, and maybe through that we'll figure out whether what they've done to solve that problem is science. So that's my warm-up. And I'm going to do a bit of a case study with you. And I decided to reach back into history and talk to you about something called the tontine. It's named for Lorenzo Tonti. He lived from 1602 to 1684, and I kind of wondered what he looked like. So I searched the internet, and the internet told me he looked like that. And it puzzled me a bit because that doesn't look at all like an Italian banker from the 17th century. So a little further search told me that that's actually a picture of Robert Louis Stevenson, the satirist, and isn't Tonti at all. And why the internet told me it was, I don't know. So I looked a little harder and I found that guy. Now, by this time, I have no idea if he's a Tonti, if he's Italian, or if he's a banker, but you got to admit, he looks like an Italian banker. So yeah, we're going to say that's the guy we're talking about. So he's a real person, lived at that time, and he observed that the King of France needed to raise money. Why did the king need to raise money? They're always at war during this period. 100 Years' War, 30 Years' War, war of this flower, war of some color, wars all the time. And they needed to raise money, and Tonti, being an entrepreneurial sort of guy, was eager to help the king get some money, and presumably get some money for himself in the process. So he presented his plan to Jean-Baptiste Colbert, a confidant of the king. So I wondered what that guy looked like, and I think he looked something like that. But you never know. But he struggled. He had a real problem making this work out well. So he had this idea, but his problem was his plan was complicated, and he wasn't sure he had the intellectual horsepower to execute his plan. He just had this vague idea of something he wanted the king to put into action, but he just wasn't quite sure what to do. He needed some help, but fortunately, he had one of these at his disposal. And so what he did is he hopped in it and is going to ask us to help him solve his problems. So we're going to look with the kind of tools actuaries use today and see what we'll make of the problem he has as he tried to help the king raise some money. So here's the general idea he had. So let's go through this a little bit slowly. Each person that participates in this scheme is going to buy a share. He called it the tontine. Not a shy guy, he said, I'm going to name this after myself if we're going to do this. So each person buys a share. So just to make up a number, the currency of the time was called the livre, but we'll just call it 100 units of money. So you buy in for 100. The money then goes into the king's pocket, and he can use it to fund his wars or to pay off debts from his previous wars or whatever he needs. But the king has 100 now. So what does the person get for having given the king 100? Each year the person is alive, he gets some money back. Payments continue until the last person dies. So if you ever hear of the word tontine used in today's vernacular, it generally refers to a scheme where a bunch of people get together and whoever's the last one alive gets whatever it is that they've agreed to. So it might be a bottle of expensive wine that they've put aside, and After the second to last one dies and there's only one person left, then he drinks the wine in honor of those who went before him. But the idea is last one to survive, to be alive, gets the most out of it. And then if there's any money left over, the king gets to keep that money. So let's have a little idea here to see how Tonti thought this might work. So 10 people each pay 100. Suppose in the first year each receives 5. So the agreement is that 5 per person. There were 10 people who signed up, so the king has 1,000. But in the first year he gives 5 to each person, so the king had to pay 50. Now suppose in year 2 one of the people has died, so there's only 9 left. The king's still going to pay 50, but there's only 9 people, so they get 50 over 9, or 5.56. And that goes on and on. In the year when we have 9 of them have died and 1 person's left, that person gets the whole 50 that year. So the king pays 50 every year, divided among fewer and fewer people. And then when the last person dies, the king doesn't pay any more. No payments are made. So let's see. Why is that good for the king? The king likes it. It's predictable. 50 a year, 50 a year, 50 a year. So he knows what his outflows are going to be if he enters into the scheme. And think, if the going interest rate was 6%, that's actually profitable for the king. Because if at 6%, he could have invested it at 6%, collected 60, paid out 50, that's 10 a year forever. And after the last person has died, he gets his 1,000 back. So it's a pretty good deal for him. It's better than borrowing 1,000 and paying 6% each year. So it's a good deal for the king. So why is this a good deal for the people who buy into the tontine? Because if they're looking and say, well, I can earn 6%, yet the king's only paying me 5%. But if I live long, I will prosper. Because I'm going to get more than 5%. Once enough people have died, if I'm still alive, I'm going to get bigger payments than 6. And I'm going to come out ahead. And I might say, presuming I don't care about my spouse or my kids or a charity or anything else, if I die, I'm dead. I don't really care that there's no more money coming in because I'm no longer around. So if a person has that attitude towards their investment, it might look like a pretty good deal for the people. Put in 100, get 5, get 5.56, keep getting more money if I'm alive, and I will keep getting that as long as I'm alive, so a never-ending stream of money. And again, if I'm dead, I'm not going to miss the income or the 100 that I never get back because I'm dead. So people might invest in this thinking I'm going to be the one who lives a long time. So that's the idea that Tonti pitched to the king. So why would we need an actuary to help him? How can an actuary help him deal with this? It looks pretty straightforward. It was all laid out on the previous slides, and let's just go do it. Except it turned out that these things didn't work very well. And let's see if we can think of some things why. So what issues need to be considered to make this work? So an actuary's job is to take the risks that are inherent in this that you may not have thought of yet and turn them into opportunities for both Tonti, the king, and his people. So my next slide asks, what are we going to look for? We want to look for design elements that would either cause people not to sign up, so it would make the whole scheme unpopular, or that would cost the king money. So in the insurance business today, one of the things we worry about all the time is a concept called anti-selection. And so I'll give you a little bit of a preview. And that's essentially where the customer knows more than the insurance company about their situation. So if a person knows that they're ill and can hide it from the company and buy some life insurance or health insurance, they'll win in the monetary sense. They're already losing in the sense that they're ill or about to die, but they can maybe extract some benefit from an insurance company by getting a premium that is for people who have normal health or lifespan. And so they've selected against the company. They've done an action that because they have information that the company doesn't have and can use it to their advantage. Other things you sometimes worry about in the insurance business is something called moral hazard, where the policy itself might give me an incentive to act badly. So the insurance policy is there to pay when somebody deserves a payment for something unfortunate that happened. But if I have insurance against my car being stolen or my house being broken into, why should I perhaps bother to lock up? So it's given me an incentive to behave in a way that I wouldn't otherwise if I know that an insurance company is going to step in and take care of me if something happens. So I don't have to bother locking, I'll get away with it for time, and if it doesn't work out well, I'll be okay. So our question here is, how could the tontine go bad? So I just wonder if anyone out there has any ideas based on how I've described it, is if there's some issues that might arise that either might cause people not to want to participate or give them an opportunity to take advantage of the king and somehow be bigger winners than they deserve to be. So any risks here of either non-participation, in which case the king won't raise the money he needs, or the subscribers somehow getting more money out of it than they deserve. Can you shout at me from way in the back there?
You know, 3 people that are going to die and you're going to live, have them chip in.
You might. So I might, I don't know if I could do that, but certainly if I'm healthier than other people, it's the reverse of the anti-selection. People who are really healthy are going to jump in, and maybe unhealthy people won't. And so I need to account for that when I wonder about how long these people are going to live and collect money as I do my calculations. Yes? Yeah. Now that's a really interesting one. If you know the other people in the so it gives you an incentive, a perverse incentive to kill people, right? Now, what's interesting is we don't do tontines today, but in the insurance business we have a concept called insurable interest. Hi, what's your name? Kayla. What do you think? Would you think it'd be a good idea if I after this presentation, I call up my insurance agent and buy $1 million policy on your life? What? No? No, and actually legally I couldn't because I have no interest in keeping you alive. And so if I bought $1 million of insurance on your life with me as the beneficiary, I have a powerful insurance incentive to do just the opposite. So actually legally I can't do that. Okay, so there's an assumption that you have an unlimited interest in your own life and your family's. But as it gets further away, it becomes more and more murky as to whether that insurable interest exists. Now, the interesting thing from the legal standpoint is, suppose we're married and I take out $1 million on your life with me as the beneficiary. No problem, right? But even though I still love you, but maybe 10 years, but 10 years later, if we're divorced and hate each other, the policy doesn't go away. Now I can kill you. Now, again, from the insurance perspective, I may get caught, or the CSI team may come in and find me out, but I can, the insurable interest only has to be established when the contract is made. It can disappear after that. And, so that's a good one. So I might have some interest in killing the other people so I get more money. There's another hand up back there, I think. Well, we'll go with that one. Okay, so the king is bearing an interest rate risk. If he's guaranteeing interest rate to the subscribers, he doesn't know for the many years of the lifetime of this contract whether that'll be sustainable. And so that's a risk for the king, that things might go bad if interest rates change. Any others? Yeah, back there.
What happens if the king dies
Okay, so think of the king as not a person, but as the government. So it's not the king personally. I mean, again, if you're talking about 17th century France, maybe the king is the country and the government. They tended to have a bit of inflated idea of their standing in the world. But think of it as the government. So the next king would take over. So the obligation isn't a personal one of the king, but of the government at the time. Now the government could fall. The government could go broke. They could lose one of those wars, and the new ruler of the country may have no interest in making those payments anymore. So that is a risk for the subscribers. I think maybe the only way to mitigate it is they all have to go, well, that's a tough one, because one way they could help prevent their country from being taken over is to go fight in the war, but then they might die and lose their income from the tontine. So that's kind of a bad outcome as well. And one more. Any more? Yeah.
Well, all the people fighting in the war would take out.
No, but again, at the time it may be a time of peace and we're paying off the last war, but now we're in a new war and my income's in danger. So I'll send my kids. That's what I'll do. So let's see what I had on my list. See if we did a pretty good job. Fraud, this is one thing you missed, and this was actually one of the biggest problems with the early tontines, is I subscribed to the tontine and I've died, and my family or friends just don't tell anybody, and the checks keep coming. So the easiest way to commit fraud here in this one is just not to tell the king you're dead. And he keeps mailing you $6 every year, and on you go. So that was a legitimate concern at the time. And here's another one, age. So think about this. We talked about, getting people to subscribe. You want to be someone who's going to live a long time. Well, it turned out on these things, anybody could subscribe, and I could subscribe my 2-year-old son and collect payments and hope that he's the last one to go. So the age thing was really big. No old person's going to sign up for this. But someone mentioned get your unhealthy friends to sign up. That helps. But another way is to get people healthier than you to sign up with you getting the money based on their life. Now, the good part there from insurable interest is you want them to stay alive. So you actually have an interest in putting a young person's name on the document, and then you're going to do everything you can to keep them alive so you get the annual payment for a long time. The time period, we talked about that indirectly. And this could go on, if you sign up a 2-year-old, even at that time, they could live a while. And so the king's and his government have to keep funding this for quite some time. And it would be nicer if it just ended. There was also competition. There were other ways out there for kings to raise money. One of them was just a straight life annuity. You give the king money, you get money back till you die. Nobody else is involved. So it clears up a lot of those other issues. Another thing that was fairly popular, still is today, of course, is to use lotteries to raise money. So just give the king some money, have a drawing, give a big prize, and we're done. So that solves some of the problems as well. The king has to keep coming up with that money forever. So some of the things you've all mentioned are sort of subsumed in these, and I think you'll find that some of the solutions we're going to talk about will help with that. So one of the things they did in the early tontines for the fraud issue was you had to appear in person to collect your check. And it actually had to be someone who knew who you were, and you had to bring ID, and they actually had a lot of safeguards to make sure that the person who was getting the money each time was the person who was the life subject to the tontine. And we talked about insurable interest, but you wouldn't want to kill the participant, but you might want to kill some of the other folks to increase your share. So we did talk about that one. There were some of the early tontines that don't have a lottery component. So you put in your money, and some people got a big lump sum, and then others participated in the tontine, but with a lower amount. So to fund the jackpot, the actual payout, if you wound up essentially being a loser in this case and just getting the annual payments, you would start out lower so that the total payments would still be the same. Some offered a conversion opportunity if you wanted to change it to that competing product, a life annuity. Now, it's the age issue that we're going to focus on because this is where an actuarial analysis can really be helpful. So the idea they had was to divide the tontine into age bands. So in our example, we'll do 10-year age bands. And so if you're, depending on which age band you're in, your payout will differ. So this is just an example. If you put in 100, if you're really young, 0 to 10 years old, maybe you get 5 a year. That then goes up as the other people in your age group die. But if you're in the 11 to 20 age band, you get $6 a year, and it goes up as the people in your age band die. So at older ages, you get more money for your 100 in recognizing that you're not going to receive that money for as long a period of time. Now, when we talk about the interest rate, that's the payout. So 5% if you get to start at 5, 6% payout if you start at 6 per 100. And we want to do it in a way that's fair. And all the king cares about is the overall payment. And this is something that insurance companies care about as well. We want to be fair when we price insurance products, but we don't have to be 100% fair to each and every person. And so I'm going to give you a little statistical example here. How many years have you been driving? Okay, I'm going to pretend, because I'm not going to ask you this half, that you've had no accidents. So we have a sample of size 3. You've been driving for 3 years, so 3 data points. Let's assume it's binomial. So each year you have a chance of having an accident, a claim on your insurance company, but you didn't. But you're 0 for 3. Now, I want to estimate your probability of having an accident next year. And so those of you who've taken a statistics class might know that for binomial distribution, the maximum likelihood estimate, the mode, which is what, unbiased, minimum variance, has all the wonderful properties of a statistical estimator, is the sample mean. Your mean is 0, right? 0 out of 3. So it seems that the fairest thing for the insurance company to do for you is to charge you 0, because that's the fairest. It's the most accurate based on your past experience. Now, how many years have you been driving? 4. And you've had 2 accidents. Okay, your estimate's 50%. Now you can imagine what the premium would be like for a driver whose probability of having a claim that year is 50%. So your fair premium is this huge number. Yours is 0. Now, would you accept paying a premium above 0? Yeah, I think so. You might want a break. You might say, hey, I've gone 3 years demonstrating I'm a pretty good driver, so I should be paid less than that guy, but maybe not 0. Now, what about you? When we were offering up this really high premium, what are you going to tell the insurance company? No. You're an excellent driver. The fact that you've only been driving 4 years, no, you're a great driver. After all, if I asked how many of you in this room think you're great, you're an above average driver, about 80% of you would raise your hands, right? And you know you're an above average driver. And it was just bad luck, you know? You just hit a patch of oil on the road that one time and, you know, something else happened. It wasn't really your fault after all. You're a pretty good driver. Why should you pay more than other folks? And the fact is, the company won't base their premium on 2 out of 4, but you'll probably pay more than the average person. You'll get a penalty. That might encourage you to be more careful next time, but also reflects the fact that there's some bits of evidence that you're not the best driver. And there's some evidence that you're a little better, but no evidence in sample of size 3 that you're a perfect driver. So the company is going to lower your premium a bit, raise your premium a bit, or maybe not in a statistical sense being completely fair to each of you, but the company's going to be okay because in total, they're going to collect about the right amount of money to stay in business. So they're still going to collect about, together, your average, and because you've gone down a little, you've gone up a little, they're going to still collect the right amount of money to cover an average person. So what that's about here is the king just wants to make sure that overall his total payout is about right, is what he expected it to be, and he wants each age band to be perceived as fair so people will sign up. Remember, that's his goal, to get a lot of people to sign up. So another option that we could consider to shorten the lifespan, and they did this, some of the tontines did this, just end it, not at the last death, but when there's 20% left, that's when it will end. We're not going to pay forever. And we might give a lump sum, perhaps, to those who are still around to make them feel a little better. But we need to put an end to it instead of waiting for the very last person. And there could be thousands of people in one of these. So it could be a long time for that last one to die. The other thing that they did is that, you know, what people really want is for their payment to go up if they keep living. But they might not even know how many people are covered. So they really don't know what their share is each year. They don't really know how many died and how many are still around. So maybe we would still tell them that this is how we're doing it, but maybe each time a person dies, we reduce our payout a little bit. So we reclaim some of it when a person dies, but still increase everybody else somewhat, but not with the constant payout. And that'll help temper the costs, maybe mitigate some of that risk of interest rates going down in the future as our annual payouts shrink as people start dying. So what he's asked us to do very specifically for our actuarial task is we're going to do a tontine design for him with 8 age classes. We're going to leave a variable X when X% of the annuity terminates when someone dies. So each time that, and we'll see with an example how that works. What we will pay up to the last death, and we'll fix the king's interest rate at 6%. So that's his target. So in this case, it's not that he wants, this is his payout target. So overall, over the whole life of the tontine, he wants his payouts to reflect 6% interest. And so if he can earn more than 6%, he will make some extra money on this. And we'll assume the anti-fraud measures have been taken. So we might do different values of X and do a lot of laborious calculations by hand, but we're going to use a spreadsheet. So I'm not going to call it up, but just have to imagine there's a spreadsheet in the background, and the reason that's really helpful is it allows me to try out all sorts of possible schemes that we might do. So I can vary X by just changing a cell and watching all the stuff change, and I can make any other adjustments I want to help understand how this might play out. Now, one of the things we need to do the calculation is a mortality table. How long are these people going to live? So we need something that tells us what the lifetime is going to be. And we also may need an estimate of how many people will subscribe to each age group, because I need to know, remember, overall I want to collect the right amount of money. So I kind of maybe have to know how many people are in each age group that we're going to collect and then pay out based on their different rates. So we're going to get a mortality table. The first mortality table was done by a guy named John Grant in England. It was published during Tonti's lifetime, and it might have been available to him, but it wasn't a very good table. The very first life table that had some degree of accuracy to it was produced by Edmund Halley. Now that's the same guy with the comet, but he's much more famous in actuarial circles for making the first quality mortality tables. And it was a little late. He did it in 1692. But we're just going to assume that we have it, and Tonti can pick up a copy and when he goes back in time with all of our advice. So when people ask him, where did you get that mortality table? If he's already telling them a tale about visiting St. Paul in 2016, he's not going to have too much more difficulty saying he picked up a mortality table from 1692. So we're going to use Halley's mortality table. And if you wonder what it looked like, mortality has improved a bit since that time. So the way you interpret this is these are ages along here. And this is out of 1,000 people, how many you'd expect to be alive at that age according to the mortality table. So I happened to plot the 1970 US population table from the census that was taken that year. It just was one I could find really easily. Obviously, there's more recent ones. But if you go across from 500, you see it takes to about age 75 before half the people have died. In Halley's day, half the people making it to about age 30. So a big change. The other thing that's different is a bit of a technology question. Halley's table ended at about age 84. And so that's all. Obviously, in the US group, it still goes on. We don't have everybody dead there. That one goes up past age 100. But I just wanted to compare the two. And he somehow didn't know about anything past age 83. His table still had 23 people expected to be alive. So I just did a little extrapolation to kill off the rest of them by age 90. So I could, you have to bring an end to it. To any mortality table, you've got to have an age by which everybody's dead. If you have somebody living an infinite amount of time, that's not good for a life insurance company or for a tontine. And just again, when we do actuarial work, we make some assumptions. One of my simplifying assumptions, I didn't have to make this assumption, but just assume that for each age group, everybody was at the age 5 in the middle. So the 21 to 30 age group, I just assume everyone's age 25. So I could have run this out with some 21-year-olds, some 22-year-olds, but this is a very common thing to just make a simplified model and help us get the information we need. So let's look at the last group. We're going to assume they're age 75. So we have 78. According to his table, you will consider that there are 78 such people. So it's easier to work with the table by just assuming that's how many are alive and join the tontine. So suppose 78 people each pay 100. Payments are annually and 1 year later. So times 0, the king has $7,800. 78 people have each given him 100. And we're going to assume that this group has a 10% payout, and the king is going to grab 20% back each time someone dies. So by the table, there are 68 expected alive at time 1. With 10 dead, the king only has to, for those 10 dead, the king only has to pay out 8 on their behalf. So that's how the 20% work. The 10 who are died were supposed to get 10% of 100, and their share is now to go to others, but the king's taking back 2 of that 10. So for the 10 who died, the king has to pay out 8 for each of them to the survivors, and a full 10 to the other 68. So the king has to pay out 760. So each person at the end of the first year gets 1118, because there have already been some deaths. So remember, my tontine, the first payment you pay in today, you get your first payment back a year later. By that time, 10 people had already died, and everybody's payments goes up. So at time 2, we have, the table says we can expect another 10 to die. So the king takes back some money. The total payout is now $737.65, and each person gets $1272. The king's payouts keep decreasing because of that 20% that he claims back each year when someone dies. And at age 89, which is the last age according to our table that anyone's still alive, that there will be 2 survivors. They each get 206. And that's it. Next year, they're both dead according to the table, and the king's done. So that's his sequence of payouts under this scheme. And so I have a sequence of payments. Remember on the previous slide, the king has this sequence of payments. He collected 7,600 or where did it go? Collected 7,800, and he had to pay out those payments. We can use Excel's internal rate of return function to find out that the king was actually incurring an interest rate of 1.25% with those parameters. So the king could actually have paid out more than 10 and at his 6% goal. So again, you could think of how a spreadsheet sets this up really nicely because it's year by year. You just track who lives, who dies according to the mortality table, see how much the king pays out, get the string of numbers, get the internal rate of return, and then use solver to force the return to 6%. And it turns out the king can give the 75-year-olds a payout of 13.3%. And that would achieve his goal of a 6% cost of interest for him to offer this to the 75-year-olds. And if you look at all the other age ranges, this is what it looks like. So it seems to meet that goal that people are expecting. Young people get less per year, but they get it for a lot longer. Older people get more up front, but their payments won't last very long. And you'll notice everybody gets more than 6%. And that's because of that 20% clawback for the king. So if you live, we can give you more because people aren't going to get the full amount. So if he was actually had to pay 6.3% in full every year, his rate would be 6.3%, essentially, because for that group that's being paid out for so long, it might as well be an infinite time period as far as interest rates or calculations are concerned. So did you notice the results did not actually depend on an assumption regarding how many people were in each age band? So that's a good deal. Each age band can stand on its own and get the king 6%, no matter how many people sign up for one age band or another. So I didn't have to balance. I came up with a scheme that was fair in each age band, but if the king thought that it would be beneficial for his marketing team, they might say, well, you're going to need to give a little more than 6.3% in that first group to get them to sign up, but we'll balance it by giving a little less to the higher age groups. And they won't mind because they'll see they're getting double what those other people are getting and won't notice that it's a little less than they should get. And so we could do that, but then we would need to know how many we expect to sign up, what proportion in each group, so the overall balance of 6% is maintained. And so we might want to call that into play if, again, our marketing arm determined that the rates on that previous table wouldn't sell for some of those age groups. But if we have to adjust it to sell, one way to sell them, those folks will have to adjust some other age groups in a different direction. Now, there's one other thing we can do, and the advantage of the spreadsheet is, well, what if the king doesn't take any money back? So I just changed that from 20% to 0. And as I mentioned before, in the first age group, the payout is 6%. So it's 6% per year. Now, it's not forever, but that 0 to 9 group is going to live a fairly long time. And a 40-year annuity is pretty much the same in present value as an infinite year annuity. When you're going to pay out that long, there's no real gain for cutting it off. But it does lower, as you'd expect, the initial payout for the highest age group by quite a bit, because King is going to get his 20% back pretty quickly as those people die out. Now he's not going to get them, and so they're going to get a fair bit less. And so now we've got a tool for the King to use, and his marketing department and his fundraisers, and to kind of decide what they think might be the best combination to offer to get raise the most money, which is his ultimate goal, and yet meet his objective of 6%. Now, the other thing that we would do in our actuarial analysis, but I won't be doing this evening, is remember all my calculations assumed that everyone would die exactly according to that table. So I had exactly that many people dying each year. What if the table's wrong? What if Hallie made some mistakes? So I could try to put a different table in or modify his table and say, am I protected against having the wrong mortality table? So I could check that out in the sensitivity analysis. I'd also want to worry that even if his table is correct, that's a table of how many you expect to die each year. But I've got actual people here, and back to that binomial distribution again, the number who actually die might differ, not because my table's wrong, but just they're random people. And the people who happen to buy into the tontine may die at some other rates, or observed rates. And so I might want to compute the variance, make confidence intervals, and do other kinds of analysis to see how much risk there is in offering rates according to that table. And then the other thing I could do that someone had mentioned is do some other interest rates and say, how bad is it going to be if interest rates drop to 4%? Am I at risk? And maybe I have to lower the payouts across the board to protect myself against that risk. Can't remember if I have another slide here. Yeah, so he has the financial risk. So we might have him do a hedging program. Is there a way we maybe can't lock in 6%, but maybe there's some derivative securities that the king can buy. He may have to go into the future himself to buy some of those. They may not have existed in France at the time, but perhaps he can buy some derivative securities to hedge his interest rate risk. And so his actuary, us, can advise him on those various things. So I want to end this with a couple of things. One, an acknowledgement. I got almost all the information, other than those internet pictures, from a monograph that was written in 1982 about the tontine. I have no idea what would inspire someone to write it, but it was actually kind of entertaining to read through all the circumstances and the variance and a lot of tables in there about tontines in many countries around that time. So what I hope I've given you is a bit of an insight into how an actuary attacks a problem. They're never as straightforward as they seem. You probably need a spreadsheet or something a little more sophisticated to make the calculations. You need to understand the risks and mitigate them either through the design of the product up front or through other mechanisms on the back end as the money's going in and out, such as a hedging program. And so I asked the question at the beginning, and I never really intended to answer it. I hope that you understood that that was more for humor than a deep scientific question or philosophical question. But the Society of Actuaries has a motto. We don't seem to advertise it as much as we used to, but it's still our motto. Like many things, there was a time when they asked the members if they wanted a new motto and proposed some. And like most actuaries in general, we like things the way they are, and maybe people in general as well. A more recent example is when the people of New Zealand rejected their new flag and just said, let's keep the old one because the new one's different. But this is our motto. The work of science is to substitute facts for appearances and demonstrations for impressions. So if people who do that are scientists, I guess maybe you'd agree that what we did today was take some appearances and impressions that Mr. Tonti gave us and turn them into facts and demonstrations that helped him solve his problem. And with that, one more thing I did mention at the beginning. I don't know if there's another slide here. Nope. I did mention at the beginning that I did something here that I've learned about presentations. There was something missing from my opening. And I know many of you don't do presentations regularly, but there was something missing from my first slide. that most people put in their presentations, and our advisor on how to give presentations said you should never do that. And so I didn't. And I know it's tough to ask you at the end now, what didn't I do at the beginning that everybody else does? Very good. An agenda, a set of bullet points that says, here's what I'm going to tell you about, point by point. You will have forgotten those by the next slide. You will never check me to see if I actually did the things I said I was going to do. And so her recommendation was just tell them what you want them to get out of it, not how you're going to get there. And you hope in the presentation itself you'll keep their attention rather than them wondering has he made it to number 3 yet? So happy to take questions if you have any. And I believe you're required to speak into a microphone this time. Or it can be repeated.
Well, first of all, let's thank our speaker. Questions?
Yeah.
So what made you pick like the tontine example instead of just doing like a standard actuary?
So I can repeat it.
Okay, yeah.
So the question is, why did I pick this example? One of the things we do in our actuarial education through our exams, in particular the earlier ones, until people are really grounded in actuarial practice, is we like to do things that aren't current. So we do that one of two ways. You do things that are historical. So, because I don't want you to, if I'm doing a current problem, somebody in the audience is going to say, well, isn't that against the legislative rule number 73.2.6? Or doesn't that violate a standard of practice? So in a lot of our stuff, we invent fictitious countries. For you Marx Brothers fans, one of the countries we often use is Fredonia. For some reason, a current one is a country called Cascadia, which is a North American country that isn't the US, Canada, or Mexico. And so by putting it in a context like this, you can isolate the things that are interesting, and nobody gets bogged down in the details of the external details that influence it. Because we also want our actuaries to know that when they go out in the world, they have to deal with all those things. And so we're going to separate simple examples that illustrate points from the real world examples that have a super amount of messiness to them. And at some point you have to learn how to deal with that. But when you're introducing something for a general audience like this, it just helps to keep things a bit simple and not have to worry about lots of other stuff. So, I got a really good response to the risks question here, and I think it was because we could put it in a context where it was kind of simple what was going on. Another question?
I know you said it was just for humor's sake, but in your opinion, is actuarial science?
Okay, I was afraid someone was going to ask me what I believe on that. I don't really know because I intentionally never tried to look up a definition of what is a science and what isn't. So you might say, do we use a scientific method? And I'm going to dodge the question a little bit by throwing it back to you. I think we all have a rough understanding of what the scientific method is of investigating problems and backing them up with evidence and testing hypotheses. We teach our candidates to be actuaries through something we call a control cycle. And it's very similar, I think. And so I would come down on yes. And the control cycle says, in actuarial work, you start by, and this is the mantra for our education, you define the problem. And that's a lot more difficult than you think sometimes. A lot of times if you actually dig down deep and know what the problem is you're trying to solve, the solution starts to reveal itself as you understand it more. But really understand the problem, then figure out a solution, and then the third step that makes it a cycle is monitoring the results. So every actuary in their practice, after they do something, they design a product, they make a decision, they follow up and see, how did we do? Did it work? Were our assumptions realized and they need to be tweaked? Did our model work the way we thought it would? And then you go back and improve it, use that information to start all over again and improve it. So that I think that part is scientific in a way. Again, we're not trying to prove theorems here. We're not trying to discover cures, but we are trying to design financial products that meet marketplace needs while keeping the company solvent. And you can do that through a scientific approach as I've described. So I'd say sort of yes. And I think the real answer is, of course, in the humor is we're called actuarial science because nobody knows, there's no word like chemist. So if someone these days would call themselves an actuariist, everybody look at them funny, including actuaries, because we never settled on an ist kind of word that describes our subject matter. So then you're stuck. So we're an actuary, so who we are doesn't have science in it, but what we study just needed something. And when people need something, they throw science in. Another question?
Any other questions? All right, let's thank Stuart again.